Hi, my name's Elias Long. Hello, and welcome to my crash course video. Today's crash course topic will be the bombing of Pearl Harbor. During this video and crash course, we will talk about the events leading up to the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the actual bombing itself, the event itself, and then what impacts it had uh, after uh, the bombing occurred, and just what the world kind of looked like after, and what came of it all happening. To begin, we will look into the events that led to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Um, so the U.S. was holding Japan to a double standard. Um, the U.S. had a closed door policy in Mexico and Central America, but Japan, on the other hand, was not allowed to have a closed door policy in Asia, um, which just allowed the U.S. to control trade in the Western Hemisphere, but basically belittled Japan's power in Asia. And then in 1931, Japan invaded Manchuria, which is the northernmost uh, section of China, which this did not bode well with America. And then in 1937, Japan launched an all-out invasion of China. They started taking cities, and then really cutting off the going around the border. Um, and then the U.S. decided to try and use diplomatic and economic reasonings to get Japan to stop the invasion of China, which was basically just a trade cutoff between the U.S. and Asia. And within this trade cutoff, there was an embargo put on oil. And with the diplomatic and economic uh, attempts by the U.S. to stall the invasion, but Japan viewed those measures as threats to their national security. With the embargo on oil between the U.S. and Asia, Japan started losing natural resources. And Japan is a country that is very dependent on outside resources, which includes petroleum, minerals, and other raw materials that help fuel the economy in Japan. And then when the U.S. put this embargo on oil uh, on Japan, it really wounded the Japanese economy. And to put things into perspective, Japan got 85% of its raw materials from the United States. So the embargo really cut down on what Japan had to work with. They went to and started searching like the West Indies, but even with all their searching, they couldn't come up with the amount of oil that they were losing, or resources that they were losing, that came about from the U.S. Putting the embargo and just the complete trade off cut off between U.S. and Asia. All the causes that I had just talked about led up to the actual bombing of Pearl Harbor. The actual bombing of Pearl Harbor was a surprise Japanese attack that happened on December 7th of 1941. It was about 10 a.m., and it was in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. And then it was a Japan strike force, which consisted of 6 aircraft carriers, and those aircraft carriers had escorts. So in total, it was about 32 vessels that the Japan strike force was. And the lack of communication between the Army and Navy commanders left Pearl Harbor vulnerable. And many Americans were angry with Admiral Kimmel, who was the Navy commander, and General Short, who was the Army commander. And they couldn't wrap their heads around how this large of a Japanese strike force could come and go and attack us without detection or then being caught later on. The attack on Pearl Harbor ended up killing about 3,000 Americans. It also disabled and/or destroyed 6 battleships. These battleships were in the harbor at the time of the attack. The attack also had destroyed most of the military aircrafts that were on the ground near the harbor. One large miscalculation by the Japanese on the attack of Pearl Harbor was that the aircraft carriers were not in the harbor at the time of the attack, which ended up being a fatal mistake for the Japanese because the aircraft carriers were the main target of the attack, and because the aircraft carriers were not in the harbor, it enabled the U.S. Navy to be able to turn around quicker and faster and attack the Japanese and retaliate back on the Japanese faster than the Japanese had anticipated, just because they had anticipated on destroying the aircraft carriers as well, and that would have taken out most of the Pacific fleet. However, the aircraft carriers were not in the harbor, which ended up being a huge mistake, and it will show as the U.S. will be able to turn around and be able to counterattack faster than anybody could have anticipated. Finally, we were going to discuss the impacts that the bombing of Pearl Harbor had. The main impact was launching the U.S. into war. Before the attack on Pearl Harbor, the U.S. had been lend-leasing, which was basically just helping the British and the USSR in the war against Nazi Germany. However, once we were attacked, it unified and angered the country, which sent us into war with the Japanese. But then once we declared war on the Japanese, the Nazi Germany ended up declaring war on the U.S. And previous to the attack, the U.S. was split between isolationists and interventionists. The isolationists really did not want to be involved at all in any kind of conflict or war. They really didn't even want to be sending supplies to the British or to the USSR. However, the interventionists wanted to do more than just send goods and send supplies. They wanted to get into the war. And on December 4th, 1941, it was leaked, and we still don't know from who. It's still an unknown source, but it was leaked about the U.S. having plans of getting involved into the war, which really caused a huge divide. However, 3 days later, the attack on Pearl Harbor unified and really fixed the rift in the country, and really just got everybody on the same page and ready to go into war. And that is the crash course on the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Thanks for watching.